Introduction. Heritage on my doorstep. The medieval Grace Jew Nunnery. My name is Derry-Ann and I live in the beautiful townland of Grace Jew outside the village of Ballybohol in North County Dublin. I chose my theme for the Heritage Week 2020 as Heritage on my doorstep. I have chosen to share the history, folklore and more of the medieval Grace Jew Nunnery, which is literally 7 fields beyond my front garden. As part of my research, I walked across the fields until I came upon the old site of the nunnery. Sadly, there is very little of the original structure left, but I will talk to you later on about more of this. However, it was hard not to be filled with awe as I reflected in silence on the life and times of the amazing Augustinian nuns who lived for over 350 years on the same site I was standing on. Grace Jew Nunnery. The townland of Grace Jew, just outside the village of Ballybohol in North County Dublin, is the site of the medieval nunnery of Grace Jew, which was a significant medieval institute. Grace Jew means God's grace. Historical sources date the foundation of the Grace Jew nunnery to around 1190. John Comyn succeeded Lawrence O'Toole as the first Anglo-Norman Catholic Archbishop in 1181. In 1190, Archbishop Comyn directed the convent, then in Hans Lane Lusk, to be transferred to Grace Jew as part of his efforts to control his interest within the ecclesiastical province. It appears that Swords Castle was Archbishop Comyn's chief residence. Swords Castle is located in the town of Swords, which is approximately 9.1 kilometres from Grace Jew Nunnery. Grace Jew Abbey was an Augustinian abbey and housed the order of nuns, the Sisters of St. Augustine. It derived most of its income from lands at Lusk and Swords, County Dublin. It is said that over the years it became mainly a refuge for the unmarried daughters of the Anglo-Irish landowners of the Pale. And it was also a very prestigious school for the daughters of the Anglo-Irish. The convent at Grace Jew was to survive until the dissolution of monastic orders in the mid-16th century. The convent building consisted of a church, house and other buildings. The domain lands consisted of 200 acres and both a water mill and a horse mill and a dovecot. 26 cottages housed the workers on the convent lands. The nunnery had a garden and an orchard with a cemetery. Before I go on to talk about the origin of Grace Jew, it is important to first look at the historical background of this period and the area in which the nunnery was built. The arrival of the Anglo-Normans in Ireland in 1169 marks the start of the late medieval period. By the winter of 1171 to 1172, the areas around Dublin were brought under Norman control. The counties of Dublin, Kildare, Meath and Louth comprised of the section of territory in medieval Ireland known as the Pale, which was supposedly loyal to the English crown. Beyond the Pale lay, and it is said, the mysterious and hostile world of the Irish, who controlled the remainder of the country. With the arrival of the Normans began an era of castle building and the development of towns in Ireland. Also with the Normans came many of the continental monastic orders, such as the Cistercians, the Dominicans, and the Augustinians, who established houses around the country. The remains of many of these abbeys have survived today. One of these medieval abbeys is the Nunnery of Grace Dieu in County Dublin. Among the many endowments that Archbishop Colman appropriated to the nuns of Grace Dieu was the church of Portrane and 18 acres attached to it. Thus began the association of Portrane with Grace Dieu. Nunneries were occupied solely by women, whether nuns, lay sisters, paying guests, or servants. They were presided over by a prioress who was elected to the office. Chaplains and priests celebrated services for the nuns in their church. At any one time, there were 30 nuns in Grace Dieu Nunnery. Many of these young ladies came from wealthy Anglo-Irish families across the Pale. The Grace Dieu nuns in County Dublin were well known for their high standard of education they provided to young ladies. What the nuns of Grace Dieu did not foresee when they were gifted the nunnery and lands from Archbishop Colman was that they were also to become estate managers, landlords, collector of tithes, and more. In medieval times, women did not get the recognition and status of women of the 20th century. This posed a major problem for the nunneries, who had to maintain good personal relationships with the lay and ecclesiastical authorities. However, there is no doubt that the nuns of Grace Dieu, to their credit, managed to keep the balance with the lay and ecclesiastical authorities to an extremely high standard over the lifetime of the nunnery, which spanned approximately 350 years. Grace Dieu Nunnery was the most extensive nunnery in Ireland. The population of Grace Dieu consisted of the prioress and the congregation of nuns, teachers, novices, workers, and their families. Craftsmen maintained the vast array of barns, granaries, stables, cattle, sheep pens, and much else besides. Ash and oak trees were grown and used to repair the property. Life would have been very good for both the nuns and the workers for many years, when they lived in harmony with both one another and the land. All of this was to change, however, when Henry VIII became King of England and Ireland in 1509. With him came the beginning of the dissolution of the monasteries and nunneries across England and Ireland. The dissolution of monasteries in England and Ireland. The dissolution was, in fact, carried out by Thomas Wolsey, a member of the College of Cardinals, who was, if it can be said, a devoted son of the Church. The purpose of the dissolution scheme was to finance a new college at Oxford, for the advance of the learning and piety and the glory of Cardinal Wolsey. It could be argued that the kings as head did not have the right to dispose the church of its makers, for the kings were secular and not ecclesiastical, which they had been until the mid-16th century. Royal supremacy had made it easy also for the king to dictate the policy, leaving the church very vulnerable. Thomas Cromwell, it would seem, devised the master plan for the dissolution of the religious institutions throughout Ireland and England. The dissolution of monasteries and nunneries in England. The dissolution was, in fact, carried out by Thomas Wolsey, a member of the College of Cardinals, who was, if it can be said, a devoted son of the Church. The purpose of the dissolution scheme was to finance a new college at Oxford for the advance of the learning and piety and the glory of Cardinal Wolsey. It could be argued that the king as head did not have the right to dispose the church of its makers, for the kings were secular and not ecclesiastical, which they had been until the mid-16th century. The first phase of the dissolution in England occurred in 1534 and 1535 and involved the dissolution of a small number of religious houses. These were in financial difficulty, and some were only too willing to participate, while others put up a struggle. The trouble arose when the Crown claimed rights to the lands of these religious houses. Religious communities which opposed these claims to the ecclesiastical lands suffered the consequences. The second phase was introduced in the form of a statutory act for dissolution of the lesser monasteries, which was introduced in March 1536. This act stated that any monasteries with revenues of less than £200 per annum were to be dissolved and the religious communities absorbed into the larger religious monasteries. In 1539, when the suppression of the monasteries was becoming a reality, the Lord Deputy and the council, of which Patrick Barnwell was a member, intervened on behalf of 6 important religious communities. Amongst these was Grace Dieu Abbey. It was put to the English government that Grace Dieu Convent could be saved from dissolution because of the high standard of education the nuns provided for the daughters of the Anglo-Irish landowners of the Pale over approximately 350 years. Nonetheless, it was not saved, and Grace Dieu Nunnery was dissolved on the 25th of October 1540. Harrowing scenes could be witnessed on the 25th of October 1540, when a writ of suppression was nailed to the door of the Grace Dieu Nunnery near Ballybohol. On the very sad day of the closure, several hundred people were evicted. There was crying and weeping as aged members of the nunnery, assisted by younger nuns, left the only place on earth they had known in the world. The procession, headed by the last prioress of the Grace Dieu Nunnery, Alison White, stretched from a red brick road from the nunnery to Swords. Their cries were heard in Swords long before they arrived. The workers and their families joined in the procession. In 1541, when the suppression of the religious houses in Ireland was proceeding, Sir Patrick Barnwell was granted the lands and buildings of the nunnery of Grace Dieu, despite strong opposition from the then Archbishop Browne of Dublin. Barnwell was the Solicitor General of Ireland at the time. In 1552, Patrick Barnwell was succeeded by his son, Sir Christopher. However, Sir Christopher and his wife abandoned Grace Dieu and built Turvey House on the lands of Turvey Donabate, granted to them by the Earl of Ormond. Sadly, the nunnery was largely demolished, and it is said that the stones were used in the construction of Turvey House. On another day when I was doing my research, I crossed the first 5 fields from my front garden and followed the River Daw, which runs through the land of Grace Dieu, until I came upon the 14th century medieval bridge. It is pretty overgrown, and it is a semicircular arch built of limestone blocks. The single arch has a span of circa 5 metres and consists of random rubble and well-squared stone. I have heard many stories and myths relating to Grace Dieu Nunnery over the years. The first myth I heard many years ago was that Cromwell and his men burnt down the convent at Grace Dieu. This transpired not to be true. Another story is that the night before Patrick Barnwell was to take over Grace Dieu Convent, he invited all the nuns at Grace Dieu to a dinner at Swords Castle. Allegedly, there was an underground passage from Grace Dieu to Swords Castle. It is said that when the nuns returned to Grace Dieu, that the Barnwell's men had burnt it down. Apparently, the cries and screams of the nuns could be heard across North County, Dublin. During my research, I spoke to some local people who have lived all their lives in Grace Dieu. I was told a few interesting tales, which I will leave with you to decide if fact or fiction. One local farmer spoke of a stone that had a face engraved on it, which was stolen by a local family. However, after they stole the stone, they had nothing but bad luck in their lives. They were so worried that they decided to put the stone back. Apparently, it was stolen again. A mother and a daughter told me how on many occasions they woke up after hearing the loud cries of the nuns of Grace Dieu. During my research of the Grace Dieu Nunnery on my doorstep, I crossed the fields just beside my front garden on many occasions. And I'd just like to share something which happened to me on one of the days that I was crossing over to the old site of the Grace Dieu Nunnery. I noticed that the fields had quite a lot of clover in them, and something told me to look down and to look for a 4-leaf clover, as we'd always heard as children that 4-leaf clovers bring good luck. And to my surprise, seconds after I thought about the 4-leaf clover, I spotted one. And you can see it in the picture to the right. The 4-leaf clover is a very rare variation of the common 3-leaf clover. According to traditional saying, such clover can bring good luck. Some folk traditions assign a different attribute to each leaf of a clover. The first represents hope, the second represents faith, the third is for love, the fourth brings good luck. Others say that the 4-leaf clover grants you the power to see fairies. However, the first reference to luck might be from an 11-year-old girl who wrote a letter to a St. Nicholas magazine in America in 1877. And she said, "Did the fairies ever whisper in your ear that a 4-leaf clover brought good luck to the finder?" I would like to mention the picture of the rune of Grace Dieu Nunnery that I used throughout my project. I came across this item while doing my research on a website online, and I bought it from Ian Golden in Arizona, USA. It is actually an original Great Britain 18th century copper plate engraved print of Grace Dieu Nunnery, County Dublin. and the artist was B. Green, but the engraver is unknown.